Imagine a world sculpted by nature, a landscape of colossal granite peaks, ancient pine forests, and winding rivers. This was the sanctuary of UC National Park, and at its heart was a ranger. Anna Lockhart, a woman who didn't just patrol this wilderness, she was a part of it. Her partner was Orion, a trusted horse whose hooves knew every trail. They were an inseparable unit, a beacon of peace in a perfect world. But in late 2003, that world went silent. On a routine patrol, Anna and Orion vanished. No sign, no struggle, just a void where they once were. The wilderness, usually an open book to Anna, offered up no secrets. The search, a desperate race against time, eventually faded, leaving a heartbroken father to search alone. For 5 long years, the mountains held their breath, and the case grew cold. The world moved on, but one man couldn't. Then a shocking discovery, not by a lawman, but by a group of unsuspecting geology students, finally broke the silence. Buried deep in an isolated ravine, they found Orion. The site of the horse's skeleton, preserved in the earth, brought a chilling answer to one question, but it unlocked a far darker, more terrifying question about Anna's own fate. This is the story of a father's unwavering love, a ranger's final act of defiance, and the quiet, obsessive secret that turned a sanctuary into a grave. It's a journey into the heart of a mystery that was buried for 5 years, and the small, almost invisible clues that finally brought the truth to light. Stay with us to the very end to see how a small pouch of seeds became the final testament to a life lived with purpose. And if you're new to the channel, please take a moment to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't want to miss our next deep dive. The static was a familiar sound at the UC National Park headquarters. It was the white noise of a landscape too vast for a clear radio signal, a mix of granite walls and dense pine forests interfering with the transmission. But on a late September evening in 2003, it was the silence that followed the static that was deeply, profoundly wrong. Rick Sandoval, the dispatcher on duty, leaned closer to his console. The routine was a well-worn path, a litany of call signs and acknowledgments as rangers checked in for the end of their shifts. One by one they reported in, their voices clear or faint depending on their location in the sprawling wilderness. Every ranger except one. He keyed the microphone, his voice a steady, practiced tone. "Dispatch to Ranger 3, David. Radio check over." More silence. It's not even the telltale click of a keyed microphone in response. Ranger Anna Lockhart, call sign 3 David, was a pillar of dependability. At 29, she had a quiet competence that commanded respect. She was never late, never sloppy. Her attention to detail was legendary. A missed check-in was so out of character for her, it immediately set a low hum of anxiety through the small control room. Sandoval followed protocol, waiting 5 agonizing minutes before trying again. The clock on the wall seemed to tick with unbearable slowness, each second a heavy weight. The sun, a fiery orange orb, was dipping below the colossal granite domes, but its beauty was lost on him. As twilight bled into the valley, the park transformed from a natural wonder into a labyrinth of shadows. When his second and third calls went unanswered, the low hum of anxiety escalated into a sharp, piercing alarm. Anna was on patrol in a quiet northern sector, a network of trails less frequented by tourists. She was on horseback, riding her steady and trusted chestnut partner Orion, a horse she had trained and ridden for years. A ranger and their horse are more than just 2 individuals. They're a single, highly capable unit. For both to vanish without a trace was not just improbable, it was a terrifying impossibility. The official process began to churn. Senior rangers were notified, and a preliminary search plan was hastily sketched on a large topographic map, with Anna's patrol route highlighted in yellow. But before the first search team had even gathered their gear, the front door of the headquarters swung open. It was David Lockhart, Anna's father. In his late 50s, with a face weathered by a lifetime spent outdoors and a steady gaze that had seen it all, David was a legend in the park. He had retired from the very same ranger station just 2 years prior. He didn't need a call from dispatch to know something was wrong. He felt it in the crisp evening air, in the rhythm of the park he knew as well as his own heartbeat. He didn't ask frantic questions. His voice was low and steady, but it carried an undeniable urgency that cut through the procedural calm. He looked at the map, his finger tracing a path Anna knew well. He knew the terrain, the hidden dangers the maps didn't show. He was the first to give voice to what the other rangers were only beginning to fear. This wasn't a broken radio. This wasn't a simple delay. Anna was in trouble. His presence galvanized the response. The official missing person report was fast-tracked. As full darkness consumed Useed Valley, the first search teams deployed. Headlamps cut sharp, lonely beams through the immense blackness of the forest.
Now, rangers on foot and horseback moved out, their calls for Anna echoing off the silent granite walls. They checked the riverbanks and the edges of the meadows, but the park offered no clues.
There were no tracks veering off the path, no spooked horse, no discarded piece of equipment. It was as if Ranger Anna Lockhart and her horse Orion had ridden into the wilderness and simply been erased from the earth. The search had begun, but it was a search for a ghost in a landscape that guards its secrets jealously. In the first frantic days of the search, hope was a dwindling but still palpable resource. It fueled the rangers as they pushed deeper into the backcountry, their efforts a desperate race against the clock. But the wilderness remained stubbornly silent. Every rock face, every thicket of manzanita, every whispering pine seemed to mock their efforts. Then on the third day, a thread of information emerged that seemed to pull the entire chaotic investigation into a single, terrifying focus. A pair of hikers, visibly shaken, reported a harrowing encounter. They had been on a trail several miles east of Anna's designated patrol route when they were charged by a large, aggressive black bear. They described its behavior as predatory and unnatural, forcing them to scramble up a rock face to escape. The report was electric, was specific, credible, and provided a chillingly plausible explanation for what might have happened to a lone ranger and her horse. The theory reshaped the entire operation. A quiet disappearance was now potentially a violent wildlife attack. The search grid was immediately and drastically shifted from Anna's intended path to the vast, unforgiving terrain of the bear's territory. The park's wildlife biologists confirmed that, while rare, such unprovoked attacks were not unheard of, especially from a bear that might be old, injured, or habituated to humans. For weeks, this became the single-minded obsession of the search effort. Teams of trackers scoured the dense manzanita thickets and steep canyons, looking for any sign. A torn piece of fabric, a discarded ranger badge, the tracks of a panicked horse. A helicopter buzzed overhead, its thermal imaging cameras scanning for any heat signature that might be a body. But the aggressive bear was never located, and the search area, a sprawling expanse of jagged rocks and impenetrable forest, yielded nothing. The lead that had burned so brightly led them into a dead end, consuming precious time and resources, and ultimately extinguishing the last embers of hope for a swift resolution. As autumn turned to winter, the official search was formally scaled back. The case of Anna Lockhart was reclassified from an active search to an open investigation, a bureaucratic term for a mystery left to fester. For the National Park Service, it was a tragic but closed chapter. But for David Lockhart, it was the beginning of a long, solitary vigil. David Lockhart refused to let his daughter's memory be archived in a dusty file cabinet. While the official investigation went dormant, his began in earnest. David's small home just outside the park boundaries transformed into a private command center. The walls of his study, once covered with family photos, were now dominated by topographic maps pinned side by side, creating a massive, sprawling chart of UCID's northern half. He began a methodical process born from a lifetime of experience. He pulled old survey maps from the park archives, some dating back to the turn of the 20th century, and painstakingly cross-referenced them with modern trail guides. He was looking for the spaces in between, the forgotten paths that official searches, bound by procedure and liability, would never touch. He knew Anna shared his love for the park's hidden history, and often explored these old game trails and miners' paths. It was a detail the official investigators had noted, but had been unable to act upon without a more specific starting point. For the next 5 years, David's life found a new somber rhythm. 3 or 4 days a week, he would pack a small rucksack with water, a compass, and a notebook and drive into the park before dawn. He walked the trails the search teams had abandoned. He bushwhacked through dense undergrowth to follow the ghost of a path he'd seen on a 70-year-old map. He documented everything with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. rockfalls that could have forced a detour, streams that had changed course, clearings that offered shelter. He filled notebook after notebook with detailed, hand-drawn maps. His archive becoming a far more intimate and detailed portrait of the wilderness than any official document. It was a punishing, lonely task, driven by a father's refusal to accept the silence. He wasn't just searching for his daughter. He was trying to think like her, to walk in her footsteps, to understand the final path she took. During this long, quiet period, investigators performed their due diligence, closing out the initial phase of the case. They reviewed Anna's life, searching for any hint of personal trouble that could explain her disappearance. They found nothing. She was universally described as happy, dedicated, and professional. One of the items they cataloged was a digital photograph found on the hard drive of her home computer. It was a radiant image of Anna and her horse, Orion, standing in a sun-drenched meadow, the iconic granite cliffs of USED rising behind them. The photo, a perfect moment frozen in time just before the world went silent, was a constant, painful reminder for David of everything he had lost. For 5 years, the case of Anna Lockhart existed only in whispers, in the quiet grief of her father, and in the cold, inactive files at the ranger station. The wilderness had swallowed her whole, and time had hardened the silence around her memory. Then, in the bright, hopeful spring of 2008, a team of university scientists, entirely unaware of the tragedy that haunted these woods, stumbled into the heart of the mystery. Dr. Lena Petrova, a geomorphologist, was leading a small team of graduate students on a research project. Their objective was mundane and academic: to study the rates of sediment deposition and erosion and use it as lesser-known ravine systems. They were mapping the unseen, charting the slow, imperceptible movement of the Earth itself. Their primary tool was a ground-penetrating radar unit, a cumbersome device that looked like a futuristic lawnmower. For weeks, their days had been a routine of setting up survey grids and analyzing the ghostly layered images that appeared on their laptop screen. The ravine they were working in that day was particularly difficult to access, the kind of place no casual hiker would ever find. This isolation was precisely why Dr. Petrova had chosen it. As one of her students, a young man named Ben, was making a pass over a relatively flat section at the bottom of the ravine, he paused. "Hey, Dr. Petrova, you should see this!" Lena walked over, peering at the laptop screen. Amidst the expected horizontal lines representing layers of silt and clay, there was a large, dense, and distinctly unnatural shape. It was a dark, oblong mass located about 4 feet below the surface. It wasn't layered like sediment, and it didn't have the sharp, irregular signature of a buried boulder. It was a coherent, solid anomaly. Her scientific curiosity was piqued, and they decided to excavate. The next day, after securing the necessary permit, the team returned to the ravine with shovels and geological picks. The digging was slow and methodical. Silence of the ravine was broken only by the scrape of their shovels and their own heavy breathing. It was Ben who felt it first. His shovel struck something that wasn't soil or rock. It made a dull, hollow thunk. He dropped to his knees and began clearing the dirt away with his hands. What emerged from the soil was not the gray of stone or the dark brown of clay. It was a curved, off-white shape. He brushed away more dirt, revealing a series of parallel, slender bones. "Lena," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "it's a rib cage." A stunned silence fell over the small group. The academic excitement of a geological discovery evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. This was no longer a research site. This was a grave. Over the next hour, they slowly and painstakingly uncovered their discovery: the complete, fully articulated skeleton of a large animal lying on its side. The bones were bleached but perfectly preserved, and as they cleared the dirt from around the legs, they found something else. 2 rusty, U-shaped pieces of iron positioned right where the front hooves would have been. Horseshoes. Dr. Petrova stood back, her mind racing. An entire horse buried 4 feet deep in a ravine miles from any official trail. This was no accident of nature. An animal that died on the surface would be scattered by scavengers in weeks. This horse had been deliberately and carefully buried. She knew immediately what she had to do. Within 2 hours, 2 senior rangers had arrived. They took one look at the carefully excavated pit and the perfectly laid out skeleton, and their faces hardened. They recognized the profound wrongness of the scene, just as Lena had. They sealed off the ravine with yellow tape, declaring it a potential crime scene. The memory of Anna Lockhart and her missing horse, Orion, was a deep scar, a story told to new recruits as a cautionary tale. A park farrier, a grizzled man who had been shoeing UC's horses for 30 years, was brought to the site. He knelt by the pit, examining the rusty horseshoes. Even through the corrosion, he recognized his own handiwork. A small, barely visible notch he hammered into the outer edge of every shoe he fitted. He retrieved his records, and the confirmation was absolute and chilling. The shoe size, the wear pattern, and his private mark all matched. The skeleton in the ravine belonged to Orion. The 5-year-old cold case of Ranger Anna Lockhart was instantly, violently reopened. The discovery answered one question, but posed a dozen more terrifying ones. They had found her horse, but where was she? The careful burial ruled out the long-held bear attack theory and pointed squarely at human intervention. But why bury the horse and not the rider? The grim discovery had not provided closure. It had only deepened the chasm of the unknown. The FBI was notified, and a new lead investigator was assigned, a sharp, tenacious cold case detective named Ira Zola. Her first order of business was to treat the entire ravine as a major crime scene, bringing in a full forensic team to dismantle the grave, bone by bone, in search of a clue that had remained buried in the dark for half a decade. The discovery of Orion's remains transformed the case from a cold file into a live, high-priority investigation. At the center of this new storm was Detective Zola, a woman whose reputation preceded her for her sharp, analytical mind and her intolerance for assumptions. Her first official meeting was with David Lockhart. She expected to meet a man worn down by years of unanswered questions. Instead, the man who walked into the command post was anything but broken. David was quiet, his face a mask of stoic grief, but his eyes held an unwavering fire. He carried a heavy, cylindrical canvas bag over his shoulder. Without a word, he walked to the largest empty table in the room and unrolled its contents. It wasn't one map, but dozens of them taped together with archival tape to form a massive, intricate tapestry of the park's northern wilderness. It was a staggering piece of work, covered in a web of fine-colored lines and tiny, meticulous annotations. Red lines for forgotten miners' tracks from the 1800s, blue for seasonal creek beds, green for game trails. It was a living document, a 5-year diary of grief, hope, and relentless exploration. Detective Zola and the other investigators fell silent, staring at the map. It was a more detailed, more intimate, and more practical guide to the search area than anything the Park Service possessed. David pointed to a spot on the map with a steady finger. "This is the ravine where you found him," he said, his voice low and raspy. Then he traced a faint green line running along the ridge directly above it. "This is an old game trail. It's not on any of your maps." Anna knew it. We walked it together when she was a teenager. He was providing them with what the original search had so desperately lacked: a focused, logical starting point. The original theory of a bear attack had pulled resources miles away to a place Anna likely never was. David's map suggested a completely different narrative, one centered on the hidden pathways known only to the most experienced woodsmen. Detective Zola looked from the father's exhaustive work to the official map on the wall. The contrast was profound. The official search had been looking at a map of a park. David Lockhart had created a map of a life. His private obsession had just become the investigation's most critical asset. While new search teams were being organized to meticulously comb the area pinpointed by David, another, quieter investigation was unfolding. Under the sterile white canvas of a forensic tent erected near the ravine, a team led by Dr. Alistair Finch, veteran forensic anthropologist, was conducting a painstaking examination of Orion's skeleton. The initial findings were deeply perplexing. There were no signs of predation, no teeth marks from a bear or mountain lion. He found no cut marks that would suggest a human had butchered the animal. Most significantly, he found no massive catastrophic fractures consistent with a long fall into the ravine. The skeleton was almost entirely intact. This horse had not been attacked by wildlife, nor had it tumbled to its death. The evidence pointed more and more strongly to a deliberate act, but the cause of death remained a complete mystery. Frustration was beginning to set in when Dr. Finch focused on the lower bones of the right foreleg. He ran his gloved finger along a minor hairline fracture on the cannon bone, an injury that could have happened post-mortem from the shifting of the earth, but he examined it anyway. He leaned closer, adjusting the angle of his lamp. Deep within the fissure, something glinted. It was an unnatural shimmer, a speck of metallic light no bigger than a grain of sand. It wasn't a mineral deposit from the soil. It was something foreign, something that had been driven into the bone with force. Holding his breath, he picked up a pair of impossibly fine-tipped tweezers. The entire tent seemed to hold a collective breath as he carefully probed the crack. After a tense minute, he managed to extract the fragment. Under the magnifier, it was revealed to be a tiny, sharp-edged shard of dark gray metal. It was clearly not lead from a bullet. It was too hard, too brittle. Later that day, back at the command post, Detective Zola stared at the minuscule fragment sealed in a small evidence bag. "So it's not a bullet," she stated, more to herself than to Dr. Finch. "Definitely not," he confirmed. "The composition is wrong. The shape is wrong. It's a fragment, a chip off something larger. It was driven into the bone with significant force, likely at the moment this fracture was created. Whatever hit this horse was made of a very hard, very specific type of metal. The discovery was a monumental breakthrough. 5 years, the case had been devoid of any physical evidence of foul play. Now, they had this. A tiny, baffling piece of metal that proved Orion had been struck. It was the first concrete clue that suggested Anna Lockhart hadn't just vanished. She had likely walked into a violent confrontation. But the clue was also a puzzle. The fragment was too small for easy identification. Zola knew it would have to be sent to a highly specialized material science laboratory. As she sealed the fragment into a larger evidence container for transport, the weight of the situation settled in. The father's maps had given them a where. This tiny shard of metal had finally given them a what? An act of violence. Now, the entire focus of the investigation would shift to finding the who and the why. While the mysterious metal fragment was making its slow journey through the bureaucratic channels of forensic science, Detective Zola refused to let the investigation stall. The discovery of Orion's violent death and deliberate burial had rendered the original 2003 investigation files almost obsolete. Every interview, every statement, every minor detail had to be re-examined through this new, darker lens. Zola's team began the painstaking process of starting over, re-interviewing everyone in Anna's life. The conversations were somber and repetitive. Everyone described the same person, a dedicated, kind, and profoundly capable woman who loved her job and had no known enemies. The narrative was so consistently positive that it was almost unhelpful. There were no obvious cracks in the facade of her life that could explain a violent end. The breakthrough, when it came, was subtle. It wasn't a bombshell revelation, but a minor detail, an echo of a past frustration that now sounded like a premonition. The team was conducting a second interview with Miles Corbin, Anna's close friend and fellow ranger. She was a real purist, Miles recalled, stirring his coffee. She hated seeing the park disrespected. Litter, people going off trail, it all got under her skin. But there was one thing that really, truly angered her. He paused, looking out the window towards the granite peaks. The poachers. Zola leaned forward slightly. "You mean wildlife poachers?" "No, not just that," Miles clarified. "Artifact poachers. Guys who come in with metal detectors and shovels, digging for old bottles, belt buckles. Stuff from the gold rush camps." She called them grave robbers of history. She felt they were stealing the park's soul, piece by piece. He explained that while tourists saw UC'd as a natural wonder, it was also a historical site. Dotted with the remnants of 19th century mining camps and settlements, these areas were federally protected, and disturbing them was a serious offense. In the months before she went missing, Miles continued, his voice lowering. She was more fired up about it than ever. She said she was finding more and more dig sites on her patrols, especially in the more remote northern sectors. She was convinced someone was running a systematic operation, and it drove her crazy. This detail, which in 2003 had sounded like a simple workplace grievance, now landed with the force of a physical blow, a violent confrontation, a buried horse, an illegal digging operation in a remote area. For the first time, a plausible motive began to take shape. She wasn't a random victim. She was a symbol of authority who had stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see. Acting on this new, electrifying thread, Detective Zola dispatched 2 junior detectives to the park's records archive. Their task was tedious, but specific: to pull every single patrol log, incident report, and citation issued by Ranger Anna Lockhart for the 12 months leading up to her disappearance. They found it a name: Kieran Briggs. He had appeared twice. The first citation was from May 2003 for using a metal detector in a restricted historical zone. The location noted in Anna's neat handwriting was within the same network of ravines where Orion's body had been found. The second citation, from July 2003, was more serious: illegal excavation. Anna had caught him with a small shovel and a bucket. Briggs had been belligerent and argumentative, claiming he was just a history enthusiast. Anna had confiscated his shovel and issued a hefty fine. The name immediately sent the detectives scrambling for the original 2003 case file. Kieran Briggs had indeed been on the initial list of people to interview. A note from a deputy who had spoken to him back then was brief. Briggs claimed he was at a dental appointment in Fresno on the day Anna disappeared. A cursory check at the time had seemed to confirm it. But now, with the new context, Zola felt a surge of adrenaline. A weak alibi that was once good enough to dismiss a minor person of interest now looked like a potential crack in a carefully constructed lie. The investigation now had a name to go with its motive. Kieran Briggs, a local resident, was described in public records as a part-time handyman, an amateur historian, who ran a small, cluttered antique shop. He had no significant criminal record, just a string of minor citations related to his activities in the park. As the team built their profile of Briggs, the possibility that Anna could still be alive, however faint, loomed over the investigation. The discovery of the horse without its rider created a deeply unsettling ambiguity. If she had been the victim of a panicked crime, it was possible she hadn't been killed, but taken. This sliver of hope, however remote, added a desperate urgency to their work. The winter of 2008 bled into the new year, and the investigation settled into a tense, frustrating limbo. Detective Zola and her team had a suspect, a motive, and a location. The evidence remained stubbornly circumstantial. Kieran Briggs continued his quiet life, seemingly oblivious to the net that was slowly being woven around him. He was a man hiding in plain sight, protected by a 5-year gap in time and a lack of direct proof. The entire case now hinged on the analysis of a metallic speck smaller than a pinhead. The call that changed everything came on a gray Tuesday morning in February 2009. The voice on the other end belonged to a materials scientist from the State Department of Justice Forensics Lab. A man whose excitement crackled through the phone line. "Detective Zola, we have the results on your fragment," says ... Well, this is fascinating. He explained that they had used a scanning electron microscope to identify the elemental makeup of the tiniest sample. "It's not steel, not iron, not lead," the scientist said. "It's a tungsten carbide alloy, a very specific one." Zola felt a jolt of electricity. "What does that mean in plain English?" "It means it's from the tip of a geological rock hammer," the scientist explained. "This particular alloy is incredibly hard, but also brittle. It's designed to chip away at hard rock like granite. When it strikes something with enough force, especially something with the tensile properties of bone, it microfractures. A tiny piece can shear right off." He went on to say that this specific alloy was favored in a handful of high-end brands used by serious geologists, prospectors, and rockhounds. It was not a tool you'd find in a typical home toolbox. It was a specialist's instrument. After hanging up, Zola stood and walked to the whiteboard. She picked up a dry erase marker. Next to Kieran Briggs's photo, she wrote in large block letters, "Rockhammer." All the desperate pieces on the board suddenly snapped into a single horrifying image. Anna confronting Briggs in the ravine. Briggs, the amateur prospector, holding the tool of his trade. A moment of panic, a violent swing. The lab result was the linchpin. It was the direct physical link between the victim's horse and the suspect's illegal hobby. It transformed the theory of a confrontation over artifact poaching into a near certainty. Zola now had enough to convince a judge that her circumstantial case was worthy of a search warrant. The raid was executed at dawn the next morning. A convoy of unmarked cars rolled into the quiet residential street where Briggs lived. While one team entered his small, unassuming house, Zola led a second team to a detached garage that served as his workshop. The air inside was thick with the smell of old metal, wood polish, and damp earth. It was a hoarder's paradise of history. Shelves overflowed with dusty bottles, rusted tools, and carefully labeled boxes of pottery shards. Tools of every description hung from pegboards. The search was methodical and tense. They were looking for one specific item, a rock hammer, possibly with a damaged tip. But after 2 hours, they hadn't found it. A cold knot of doubt began to form in Zola's stomach. Had he gotten rid of it years ago? Just as the initial search of the workshop was winding down, specialist from the National Park Service's Historical Preservation Office called Zola over to a set of flat file drawers. "Detective, you need to see this." He had opened a drawer to reveal dozens of artifacts, each nestled in its own foam cutout and meticulously labeled. He pointed to a collection of square-headed iron nails. "These are from the 1850s. They were only used in the structures at the old Pinyon Creek logging camp." He then pointed to a shard of blue and white ceramic. "And this is a specific pattern of English earthenware. We found other pieces, but only at one site." Zola felt her pulse quicken. "Where is that site?" The historian looked up at her, his expression grim. "It's a small, historically significant miner settlement from 1852. Its location is deep inside the same ravine system where you found the horse." It was the checkmate moment. They hadn't found the murder weapon, but they had found something just as damning. Briggs hadn't just been dabbling. He had been systematically looting a protected archaeological site, the very site Anna was likely patrolling when she disappeared. His collection was a detailed catalog of his crimes, proving he had been there, proving he was lying, and providing an ironclad motive for silencing a federal officer who had caught him in the act. They might not have found the hammer, but they had found his entire reason for using it. The circumstantial case was now overwhelming. Zola picked up her radio. "We have enough," she said. "Bring him in." Kieran Briggs was brought to the command post. Zola wanted him on her turf, in a room where the walls were covered with the ghost of Anna Lockhart. He walked in with an air of aggrieved indignation, a man bothered by a bureaucratic mistake. He was of average height and build with pale, watchful eyes that darted around the room. Taking in the maps and photos before settling on Zola, he maintained his composure as she began the interview, recounting the same flimsy alibi he had given 5 years earlier. "I told the other officer in 2003, he said, his voice a reedy monotone. "I was in Fresno that day. I had a root canal. You can check." "We did check, Kieran," Zola replied calmly, her voice even. "We checked back then, and we checked again. You had an appointment." "That's true, but you canceled it that morning." "The dental office records are very clear, so I'll ask you again. Where were you on September 23rd, 2003? A flicker of panic appeared in Briggs's eyes. A brief disruption in his carefully maintained calm. The foundation of his 5-year-old lie had just crumbled. He stammered, trying to backpedal, but the certainty in Zola's voice was absolute. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment, before she slid a series of photographs across the table. They were high-resolution images of the artifacts from his workshop, the square nails, the ceramic shards. "These were found in your workshop this morning, Kieran," she said. "Our expert from the Park Service has identified them. They come from a single protected historical site, a site deep in the ravine where we found Anna's horse." Briggs stared at the photos, his face paling. The evidence of his secret obsession was laid out before him, irrefutable proof of his illegal activities. He looked trapped. Zola pushed the final piece across the table, a magnified image of the tiny tungsten, carbide fragment pulled from Orion's bone. "And then there's this," she said softly. "Our lab found it embedded in the horse's leg bone. It's a chip from the tip of a geological rock hammer, the kind of man who digs for artifacts might carry." The fight went out of him. It was as if a string had been cut, and the puppet-like facade of the harmless hobbyist collapsed. His shoulders slumped. His face, which had been a mask of defiance, crumpled into a portrait of pathetic self-pity. He stared at the table for a long time, the silence in the room broken only by the hum of a computer. When he finally spoke, his voice was a broken whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he began, the confession tumbling out. a torrent of words held back for half a decade. He explained that he was in the ravine that day, digging at his secret spot. He had just unearthed a rare, intact bottle when he heard the sound of a horse. He looked up to see Anna Lockhart on Orion, standing on the ridge above him, looking down. He said she didn't shout, she just dismounted and made her way down into the ravine, her expression one of grim disappointment. "She knew who I was," Briggs recounted, his voice trembling. "She recognized me from the last time. She told me I was done, that this time she was taking me in. She said I was under arrest for a federal felony." The words felony arrest sent a wave of pure panic through him. Saw his entire world imploding. His precious collection, the work of years, would be confiscated. He would go to prison. He said he begged her, pleaded with her to just take the bottle and let him go. But Anna was resolute. She reached for her radio. "I just lost it," Briggs whispered. "My hammer was in my hand. I didn't even think. I just swung." He described the sickening thud as the hammer struck her head. She collapsed without a sound. The horse Orion became frantic, rearing and pulling at its reins. In his frenzy, terrified the noise would attract attention, Briggs lunged at the animal, swinging the hammer wildly to silence it. The second part of his confession was even more chilling, delivered with a detached, methodical coldness that belied his earlier panic. The violence was over, and a different part of his mind took control. The meticulous, obsessive planner. He knew he had to make them disappear. The horse was a dead weight, impossible to move far. Spent hours digging the pit deeper with the confiscated shovel, eventually rolling the massive animal in and burying it. He worked all through the afternoon and into the night, guided by the moonlight. But Anna was different. He was determined that she would never, ever be found. He spoke of a place he knew, a deep, vertical cave, a narrow fissure in a rock face, hidden behind a curtain of dense manzanita brush and poison oak. It was a perfect hiding place, a natural tomb. He described how he carried her body, a grueling, nightmarish journey of several miles through the dark woods. He pushed her into the fissure, listening as her body tumbled into the blackness. He was certain no one would ever find her there. It was a place that didn't exist on any map, a secret kept by him and the silent pines. When he finished, a profound quiet settled over the room. The 5-year mystery was solved. There was no complex conspiracy, no shadowy organization. There was only a pathetic, obsessive man, a moment of panicked violence, and a desperate, chillingly effective cover-up. Detective Zola looked at the broken man across the table, then picked up her radio to give the order. A specialized search and rescue team was to be mobilized. Kieran Briggs was going to lead them back to the pines, back to the secret grave where Anna Lockhart had lain hidden for more than 5 years. The journey to Anna's final resting place was a somber, silent procession. Kieran Briggs, stripped of his indignant facade and now shackled, led the way, his steps shuffling and uncertain. He was flanked by 2 deputies. Behind them walked Detective Zola and David Lockhart. David had insisted on being there. After 5 years of searching the wilderness alone, he would not let his daughter be brought out of it without him. A specialized search and rescue team, experts in high-angle and confined space recovery, followed with heavy bags of ropes, harnesses, and lighting equipment. They moved through the dense forest, following a path that wasn't a path at all, pushing through thorny undergrowth and over fallen logs. The air grew cooler as they descended into a shaded, moss-covered part of the forest, a place the sun rarely touched. After nearly an hour of grueling hiking, Briggs stopped, pointed a trembling finger toward a wall of granite, almost completely obscured by a thick, tangled curtain of manzanita and poison oak. "It's in there," he mumbled. If you didn't know it was there, you would walk past it 1,000 times and see nothing. It was not a cave in the traditional sense, but a deep vertical fissure in the rock, no wider than a man's shoulders. It was a scar in the earth, a crack leading down into absolute blackness. The rescue team went to work with professional quietude, clearing the brush from the opening, and setting up a complex system of anchors and pulleys on the sturdy pines nearby. The lead rescuer, a man named Gavin, did a final check on his harness and headlamp before giving a nod to his team. He was to be lowered into the fissure. The air that breathed out of the opening was cold and smelled of damp earth and deep thyme. David Lockhart stood back, his face a chiseled mask of grief, watching as the rescuer disappeared into the dark maw of the earth. The only sounds were the soft whir of the pulley system and the occasional dislodged pebble skittering down into the depths. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, Gavin's voice came over the radio, calm and professional, but heavy with the weight of his discovery. I have contact. I have visual confirmation of human remains. A collective silent breath was released by the team above ground. Zola placed a steadying hand on David Lockhart's shoulder. He didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on the black opening in the rock, as if he could see through the stone and soil to his daughter below. The recovery was slow and incredibly delicate. Gavin worked in the cramped darkness, carefully securing Anna's remains in a specialized recovery bag. The process was one of profound respect. A rescue mission 5 years too late. Finally, the signal was given. The team above began to haul the line, bringing their fallen colleague home. As the bag was gently laid on a tarp near the opening, a heavy silence settled over the small clearing. The on-site coroner began his preliminary examination with quiet dignity. He noted the tattered remains of Anna's ranger uniform. Pinned to the fabric over her chest, tarnished but intact, was her ranger badge. David closed his eyes for a long moment. Even in this dark place, she was still a ranger. Then the coroner found something else. Tucked into a small pocket of her patrol trousers was a small weathered leather pouch, its drawstring pulled tight. It was an anomaly. Zola carefully took the pouch. It was not standard issue equipment. She looked over at Miles Corbin, who had been asked to come to help with any potential identification of personal effects. His face was pale, his eyes filled with sorrow. Zola held out the pouch. "Miles, do you recognize this?" He nodded slowly, reaching out a hesitant hand. "It was hers," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She made it herself. She was always collecting things." With trembling fingers, he loosened the drawstring and tilted the pouch. A small collection of dried seeds and thistleheads spilled into his palm. "What are they?" Zola asked gently. "Invasive species," Miles explained, a sad smile touching his lips. "This one is Italian thistle. This is yellow star thistle." Anna was on a one-woman crusade to map and remove invasive plants from the park's native meadows. She said they were choking out the wildflowers. She would collect the seeds whenever she found a new patch so she could log the location and report it for removal. The discovery hung in the air. A revelation more profound than any piece of evidence in the case. This small pouch of seeds was a testament not to how Anna died, but to how she lived. On her final day and her final hours, she had been doing her job. Not just the law enforcement part, but the deeper, more personal work of a guardian. She had been protecting her park right down to its smallest flower, her purpose unwavering until the very last moment. Kieran Briggs was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His collection of stolen artifacts was turned over to the National Park Service archives, becoming a permanent exhibit on the importance of historical preservation. In the years that followed, David Lockhart did not let grief be his only legacy. After the case was closed, he began volunteering for the Park Service. He shared stories of the gold rush miners, the park's early days, and of a dedicated ranger who knew the wilderness so intimately that she noticed even the smallest, most unwelcome seeds, and who gave her life protecting the place she loved. And that brings us to the end of this incredible story. Ranger Anna Lockhart's final act wasn't one of fear, but of dedication. Her father, David, found a way to honor her legacy, not by getting lost in grief, but by continuing her work, a beautiful testament to their bond and her unwavering love for the wilderness. This case is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important clues aren't found in grand landscapes, but in the smallest, most personal details. It was a father's relentless hope, a tiny shard of metal, and a handful of forgotten seeds that finally brought a ranger home.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.